This is a giant mystery statue, and inside of it is one of the hardest prisons which I am going to attempt to escape. I spawned inside a bedrock room with a sign telling me I couldn't break any blocks. To my right, I saw a chest, and inside of it were 3 stone blocks. I looked down and saw a large drop that I knew I wouldn't be able to survive. I looked at the wall and noticed an opening, and right above it, a stair lodged into the wall. I thought that I might be missing something, so I looked into F5 and found a hopper below me. I angled myself correctly and opened the hopper, which had redstone torch in it. Suddenly, I saw water flowing down, and I knew how to jump into it to access the opening in the wall. In this small opening, there was a chest, and inside of it was a knockback stick, beetroot, nether quartz, redstone dust, and another redstone torch. I looked down from the opening and figured I could survive the rest of this fall. So I jumped down, barely surviving. When I dropped down, I noticed a gold block with the number 3 on it. I knew that this had to be an important clue for later, so I wrote it down. In the next room, I found some mechanics in a blocked off hallway. There was also a crafting table with a villager next to it. I checked the villager's trades and saw that it was selling 1 block of amethyst for 1 golden nugget, but I didn't have any amethyst, so I went to see what I could craft and figured out that I had all the materials for a comparator. So with the knockback stick, I hit the villager down the hallway and crafted the last redstone torch that I needed to make it. I knew that I needed this to activate the dropper, so I placed a random beetroot in it and placed the comparator just right, which opened the hallway to the next part. I went down the hallway and noticed an area that I couldn't reach, and went to the end of the tunnel, which had a drop into the next part of the prison. So I took my chances and landed safely into the next mysterious room. In this area there was a tall ceiling, and when I turned the corner I found the next clue, which was the stone with the number 0, so I wrote that down for later. I found 2 hoppers, and in it were 2 amethyst, a trapdoor, and a pressure plate. I looked up and noticed a chest, and inside of it was 2 tinted glass. I knew that I needed to use the materials to build up this tall tower, but I was stuck because I didn't have enough, so I checked the chest again and noticed something tricky. In the empty slots there were actually light gray glass panels, which perfectly blended in with the background of the chest, and now I knew what I had to do. So I started building up the tower with the glass panes, and used 1 tinted glass to get up the last block. At the top, I noticed a 1 block gap, and I knew that I needed to push myself down with the iron trapdoor and activate it with the pressure plate. When crawling, I noticed the gap that I needed to cross, so I placed my tinted glass and 1 amethyst block to crawl through. I was able to successfully get to the next room. In this room, there was a hallway with an exit sign, but it was sadly closed off. There was also a hole in the ceiling, but the main part was these set of numbers, which was probably a number lock to open the exit door. And from the clues earlier, I already had 2 of the numbers. Near the hole in the ceiling was a note block, and when I hit it, it activated an elevator into a new room. In this new room was a sign with what seemed like gibberish. Next to it was a dropper and a note block. In the other corner was the villager I had seen in the beginning that was selling amethyst for a gold nugget. Now the sign made sense, it was golden nugget spelled backwards. So I traded with the villager and placed the nugget into the dropper and activated it. And surely enough, the next passageway opened up. I went down it and noticed a water elevator, which brought me into the creepiest room so far with a tall dark statue. I ran to the hallway on the right and found our next clue, copper 1, so I wrote that down for later. Next, I went to the room on the left and found an empty dispenser, a wall with a ladder, and an empty hopper. After not finding anything else of use in this room, I went down the other water elevator, which brought me into the new puzzle room. This room had a weird water tunnel, 8 lamps on the ceiling, a sign that said gold ingot for inscription 4, a dropper full of stone tools, a crafting table, a dropper, and a note block that needed a gold block to open the door. I tried placing the stone tools in the dropper, but it didn't work. I found these books on the wall. The first one read Inscription 1. May the artifacts from the Stone Age light up 5 of the 8 lamps. Inscription 2 read, 1 artifact in the funnel lights up 3 lamps. 2 artifacts lights up 6 lamps, and 3 artifacts would light up 9 lamps, but there are only 8. And inscription 3 read, 1 artifact in the shooter dims 2 lamps, 2 artifacts dims 4 lamps, 3 artifacts dims 5 lamps, and 4 artifacts dims 7 lamps. I knew that this was a math problem, and I needed it to equal 5 lamps. So I went up the water elevator with my stone artifacts, and placed 3 stone artifacts in the hopper to turn on the 9 lamps, and then I placed 2 stone artifacts in the dispenser to turn off 4 of the lamps, which would equal the 5 lamps. So to see if it worked, I went down the water elevator, and sure enough, some gold nuggets were now on the floor. I picked them up and I had 9, which was the perfect amount to craft 1 gold ingot, which I needed to put into the dropper for my next clue. Sure enough, it opened the water tunnel. So I went through it and I found the next clue, lapis 5, and I wrote that down for later. Further down the tunnel was a chest with an ender pearl, and a book on the wall that I took. I opened the book and it said Inscription 4, 4. The shooter in down below needs full power. I didn't know how this would help me right now, but I knew what I needed to do with the pearl. So I went into the previous room and took all of my stone artifacts, and went to do an ender pearl glitch through the ladder to get into the statue room. On the back of the statue was a ladder that I climbed. At the top, I found a chest that was full of golden nuggets, so I took all of those. I went down and I noticed a hole that I needed to drop into. So I fell down and I noticed that I found the next clue, iron 3, so I wrote that down for later. Down the hallway was a dropper with a waxed block of copper, so I took it, went down, and used it to build up into the original area, and went back into the lamp room. Now I knew what I needed to do. To open this doorway, I needed a gold block, so I crafted all of my nuggets into gold ingots, and then into one gold block. I placed it into the dropper, hit the note block, and sure enough, it opened up the next area. Before I dropped down, I took all of the books in case I needed them, and dropped down and found a dispenser. Further down the hallway was a room with a line of ores, and I figured out that this was the order of the numbers I have been finding throughout the prison, which would perfectly come together to make a code. But I was missing one number, so I went down this hallway, which strangely enough led me back to the beginning of the prison. But one thing was different. The gold block from earlier was now a diamond block with the number 4 on it. So I wrote this down, and when going back to the ore room, I figured out that I had all the numbers for the code 353041. I read inscription 4 again and suddenly knew what it meant. The dispenser I found was the shooter, and for it to work, I needed to fill it up fully, and I had the perfect amount of items to do so. Now, when I went back to the ore room, there was a hole in the ground that opened up, so I dropped down and hit this note block, which opened up the elevator into the code room. Now, everything was coming together. To open this exit, I needed to enter the code into the number pad, so I hit 353041. And suddenly, the exit had opened. Now, I needed to think fast, so I ran into the exit. I saw the outside and I knew I couldn't survive the jump. Luckily, I found a water bucket in the wall, but I couldn't place it on the black concrete, so with my quick thinking, I placed the water on the one dirt block and safely drifted myself down the prison. And I had finally escaped the mystery prison.